March 21, 1968. Southern Quang Nai Province, South Vietnam. Edges of the Sun Ha Valley. The dawn fog still clung to the Paddies when the first sound rolled across the wetlands, a deep, rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the mud like an approaching storm. Private First Class Lê Văn Tự of the 2nd Battalion, 52nd Regiment, NVA, froze mid-stride, his bare feet sinking into the cool water between rows of young rice shoots. He wasn't the only one. All across the tree line, North Vietnamese soldiers crouched low, eyes narrowing, rifles lifting. The sound grew louder, then louder still. Two had heard helicopters before, distant, muffled, usually far above the canopy where the Americans like to hide behind the clouds. But this was different. These weren't distant machines. These were coming straight at them. A shout from deeper in the tree line, Truck Tang Mai. Chuan Bai Ban. American helicopters. Prepare to fire. But something felt wrong. The Paddies were too soft, too flooded, too fragile. No pilot would be reckless enough to put a helicopter down here, Tu thought. No machine could land on waterlogged mud. Right? He steadied his worn Type 56 rifle, the wood darkened from humidity and sweat. Dragonflies skimmed across the water between him and the open field. To his left, Sergeant Pham Hue Sang pressed his palm down, signaling everyone to stay motionless. "Wait," the sergeant whispered. "Let them pass overhead." Then the fog parted. From the southern horizon emerged the unmistakable silhouette of UH-1 Hueys, 6 of them, flying low, rotors slicing the morning air, kicking up trails of mist behind them like ghosts skimming the surface. Their side doors were open. Door gunners leaned out with M60s, scanning the ground below. Sunlight glinted off the barrels. But the thing that made 2's breath catch in his throat. They weren't pulling up. They weren't slowing to hover. They were descending. Straight onto the rice paddies. Kong the now. Impossible. The water rippled violently as the first Huey descended just 20 yards from the center dike. The downdraft smashed the rice plants flat and blasted muddy water outward in a spray that hit 2's face before he could duck. The helicopter's skids punched into the paddy, yet instead of sinking, the bird held steady. Balanced. Stable. The NVA soldiers stared in disbelief. Helicopters weren't supposed to land here. The mud ate men whole if they weren't careful. But those American pilots, they were treating the field like a landing zone carved from solid earth. And the moment the skids touched, the side doors erupted with motion. U.S. Army Infantry, men of Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 14th Infantry Regiment, stormed out into knee-deep water, rifles high, boots splashing. Their sergeant, Staff Sergeant William Red Halpern, shouted over the rotor wash, "Move! Move! Form a perimeter on the dike. Let's go." The second Huey touched down. Then the third. The NVA soldiers watched, stunned, as dozens of Americans poured out into what should have been impassable terrain. "Tat ca veo 6 try. En han len." Sang barked. "Everyone to positions. Now." But they were already behind. The Americans had arrived faster, louder, and in a way no one on the North Vietnamese side had believed physically possible. And the shock of that moment, the realization that the enemy could land anywhere, ripples through the patrol like a jolt of electricity. The Paddies that had always protected them were no longer safe. Don't forget to like if this opening pulled you in. Subscribe for more Vietnam War stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The Americans were spreading fast. Within seconds of touchdown, Staff Sergeant Halpern splashed through the knee-deep water toward the center dike. His M16 raised, eyes darting left and right. He'd landed in rice paddies before, too many times to count, but even he felt the tension humming in the air. The mist. The silence between rotor beats. The tree line that seemed too still. Perimeter. Check your sectors, he yelled, the wind ripping the words from his mouth. Private Russell Kerr, carrying an M79 grenade launcher almost as long as his torso, stepped off the skid with a grunt. The mud sucked at his boots. Jesus, Sarge, feels like the ground's breathing. Yeah. Halpern shot back. Then hope it doesn't swallow you whole. Another burst of wind tore across the paddy as the fourth Huey flared for landing. Its downdraft flattened the young rice plants into a shimmering sheet beneath the soldiers' feet. The air smelled of wet earth, fuel, and something metallic. Fear, maybe. Meanwhile, unseen in the tree-lean, NVA Sergeant Sang pressed his back against a bamboo trunk, heart pounding. He had never witnessed helicopters land this close, this aggressively, and on such unstable terrain. The pilots were either insane or terrifyingly skilled. So this is their advantage, he thought. Speed. Truck. Noise. He signaled to his men. Kong no sung. Cho chung veo sao han. Do not fire. Wait until they come in deeper. But the Americans weren't advancing blindly. Halpern halted his squad at the dike, raising a clenched fist. Specialist Mark Jennings, point man with an XM16E1, froze instantly. Jennings's gaze locked on the tree line. Movement. Halpern didn't have to ask where. At that same instant, Private Lê Văn Tự lowered himself deeper into the paddy water, only his eyes above the surface. The Americans were scanning too sharply, too carefully. One wrong move and a ripple in the water. Kerr adjusted his M79. Sarge. I see it, Halpern whispered. The two factions, barely 30 yards apart, locked into a silent standoff, listening to the pounding rotors overhead. Another Huey swooped low, a door gunner sweeping an M60 across the tree-lean in slow arcs, ready to spit fire at the first muzzle flash. Then, from deeper within the valley, came the distant pop of gunfire, AKs. A separate platoon of NVA had just engaged Charlie Company, who'd been inserted moments earlier. The Americans in the Paddies stiffened. Sang swore under his breath. That early contact wasn't part of the plan. The Americans would now be on full alert, which meant the ambush he'd hoped to set was starting to unravel before it even began. Staff Sergeant Halpern lifted his hand again. Bravo, shift right. Use the dike. Stay low. Boots splashed. Water churned. Two felt movement surge through the paddy like a living thing. The window for a clean attack was closing fast. Sang clenched his jaw. Chuan Bai. Get ready. The Americans were coming. The NVA were waiting. But the rice paddies, those soft, unforgiving fields, belonged to neither side. Today, they would decide who lived and who didn't. If you're loving this story so far, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep-dive Vietnam War narratives. And comment where in the world you're tuning in from. The Americans shifted right along the dike, boots sloshing through the murky water, rifles up, breath slow. The last Huey climbed back into the sky, rotor wash sending ripples across the field as it ascended. With the noise fading, a crushing quiet fell over the paddies. Too quiet. Staff Sergeant Halpern crouched low, hand on the dike's mud-packed edge. Jennings, eyes front. Kerr, get that blooper ready. The young grenadier swallowed. Loaded. Halpern didn't look back. Good. You're gonna need it. Across the paddy, hidden among reeds and drowned stalks, Private Lê Văn Tự eased his cheek against the warm metal of his Type 56. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips. Mud clung to his arms. The smell of wet vegetation filled his nose. Every instinct screamed to fire first. But Sergeant Sang's silent hand signal held him back. Wait. Wait. The Americans advanced in slow, methodical steps. Nothing reckless, no gaps, no blind spots. These were veterans. They moved like men who'd been ambushed before. Sang's jaw tightened. They've learned. They're adapting. But he still had numbers. His platoon, 26 men, lay hidden across the tree-lean and in the paddy's edge. If the Americans stepped 10 yards deeper, they'd be walking into overlapping arcs of fire. Halpern's squad reached the midpoint of the dike. Jennings raised a fist. Halt. He pointed with 2 fingers toward a patch of reeds swaying too gently to be wind-driven. Halpern whispered, "Kerr. 1 round. Soft lob." Kerr exhaled, braced the M79 against his shoulder, and fired. The 40mm round arced lazily, almost peacefully, before disappearing into the reeds. For a half-second, perfect silence. Then, boom. Water exploded upward in a geyser of mud and shredded plants. A scream tore from the tree-line. 2 NVA soldiers bolted upright, dazed. Their cover was gone. Tan Song. Sang roared. Attack. The world erupted. AK-47 fire hammered across the Paddies, bullets stitching white trails across the water. American M16s answered instantly, sharp and furious. The air filled with the snap of passing rounds, the splash of ricochets, and the guttural shouts of men fighting for their lives. Jennings returned fire in controlled bursts. Contact front. 10 meters. Halpern shoved him down. Get low. Keep it tight. 2 fired twice, the recoil punching into his shoulder. Beside him, a comrade fell backward into the muddy paddy, water turning red. The Americans hugged the dike, using it as a shield. Kerr fired round after round, each explosion throwing mud, water, and shrapnel into the air. The grenadier's face was streaked with black mud, but he kept firing, jaw clenched tight. A bullet snapped past Halpern's ear. He growled, "You picked the wrong damn field to hide in." Above them, a Huey suddenly banked back into view, drawn by the firefight. Its door gunner opened up with the M60, tracers ripping horizontal fire into the tree-line. Sang cursed. The Americans weren't just fighting, they were bringing the sky down with them. Tu pressed himself deeper into the water as the Huey's guns roared overhead. The Paddies trembled. He couldn't believe it. American helicopters landing on rice fields was shocking enough. But using those same fields as a battlefield? It defied every piece of terrain logic he had grown up with. The Americans were rewriting the rules. And his unit was paying the price. The tree-line shook under the Huey's strafing fire. Leaves, bark, dirt, everything blasted into the air as the M60 unleashed a hail of rounds. Private Lê Văn Tự pressed his face into the muddy water, the vibration running through his chest like a second heartbeat. He couldn't look up. Not yet. Not while the sky itself was attacking. Sergeant Sang dragged 2 of his men deeper behind a fallen log, shouting commands over the roar. Tan ra. Dung de truck tang tap trung ban veo mot cho. Spread out. Don't let the helicopter concentrate fire on one position. The NVA soldiers abandoned their shallow fighting positions, ducking and sprinting through the underbrush. Sang's mind raced. The Americans had forced the fight into the open field, into the Paddies where mobility, shock, and helicopter support gave them every advantage. He needed to change the equation. Tu lifted his head an inch, enough to see Sang waving toward the right flank. A small irrigation ditch cut across that side, its banks overgrown with wild grass. If they could maneuver through it unnoticed, they could hit the Americans from the side, and break their formation before another bird lined up a firing run. Sang grabbed Tu by the arm. "You, come with me." Tu nodded, heart punching against his ribs. Back in the Paddies, Staff Sergeant Halpern watched the Huey pull up to avoid overflying friendly positions. The door gunner gave a thumbs up before the aircraft banked to return to its holding pattern. Halpern knew what that meant. They had maybe 30 seconds before the next gun run. He scanned the tree-line. Jennings. 2 movers right side. Jennings fired a 3-round burst. They're trying to flank. Bravo 2. Shift right. Keep 'em pinned. 6 Americans splashed across the paddy, water flying around them in arcs. Kerr reloaded his M79 with trembling hands, breathing hard. "Sarge, they're not breaking. They're maneuvering." "Of course they are," Halpern growled. "They're good. Don't underestimate him. But he knew what Jennings didn't. If the NVA reached the ditch on the right, they'd have enfilade fire on Bravo Company. A perfect kill zone. Halpern keyed his radio. Falcon 6, this is Bravo 1-1. We've got enemy movement attempting to flank. Need that gunship now. Static. Then a voice crackled through. Roger, 1-1. Bird inbound. Keep your heads down. Across the Paddy, Sang and two reached the ditch. They slid into the knee-deep channel, mud coating their uniforms. Sang peeked over the bank, spotting the Americans shifting right along the dike. He exhaled slowly. This is the moment. Chuan Bai Ban, he whispered. Prepare to fire. Two steadied his rifle. 30 yards away, Halpern saw a faint ripple in the ditch. His stomach dropped. Kerr! He shouted. Blooper! Ditch, now! Kerr didn't hesitate. He fired. The 40mm round sailed through the air in a perfect, slow parabola. And Sang saw it too late. Plump! Boom! The ditch erupted in a fountain of mud and water. The blast threw Sang backward, slamming him against the bank. His ears rang. His vision blurred. But through the ringing, he felt more than heard the rumble of rotor blades returning. The Huey was coming back. And this time, it was lined up directly on their position. Two coughed, tasting mud and blood, trying to pull himself upright. His hands slipped. His rifle sank deeper into the ditch water. Above him, the helicopter descended like a steel phantom. The Paddies shook. The air screamed. And Sang realized the truth. Landing helicopters on rice paddies wasn't the shocking part. Fighting from them was. The Huey roared in low, skimming just above the Paddies as its pilot angled toward the ditch. The rotors tore the air apart, sending violent ripples racing across the water. Mud, rice shoots, and debris blasted outward as the helicopter slowed to a hover directly over Sang's battered position. Inside the cockpit, Chief Warrant Officer David Hawk Morrison leaned forward, jaw clenched. I see movement in the ditch. Door gunner, light him up. Yes, sir. The M60 opened with a blistering roar. Tracers slashed downward, carving into the ditch bank and the reeds along the edge. Water erupted in bursts as bullets punched through the shallow channel. Sergeant Sang rolled onto his stomach, pressing himself flat against the ditch wall, shielding his head from flying debris. He yelled, Ju Dao Thap Suong. Keep your heads down. Private Lê Văn Tự tried to drag himself deeper under the bank, but the rotor wash was so strong it pushed the water against him like a current, threatening to expose his position. Above them, the Huey's gunner swept left to right, trying to flush out any remaining movement. The sound was deafening, metal clashing with wind, gunfire echoing across the flooded fields. On the dike, Halpern's men cheered as the bird laid down fire. Jennings shouted over the noise, That's it! Keep hitting that ditch! But Halpern wasn't celebrating. He understood how quick the NVA could reposition. He scanned the tree line again, eyes sharp. Stay alert. They're not done yet. Kerr sloshed next to him, breathing hard. Sarge, you think they're pulling back? Halpern shook his head. Not with the way they fight. They'll try something else. Across the ditch, Sang coughed through the mud, struggling to regain his senses. His world spun. Every breath felt thick, like trying to inhale through wet fabric. He pushed himself upright just enough to see two struggling to grip the muddy bank. Two! He shouted. Two lifted his head weakly. Sang grabbed him by the collar and yanked him fully under the embankment. Stay with me. Don't move unless I tell you. The boy nodded, clutching his soaked rifle. The helicopter shifted slightly, drifting left to get a clearer angle. Its shadow stretched across the paddy like a massive, spinning cross. But it was that shift, those few feet, that exposed something the Americans hadn't seen. To the far left, hidden beneath a collapsed section of earthen dike, An NVA assistant gunner lifted a mud-covered RPD light machine gun onto his shoulder. The barrel poked through the wet grass. He spat blood, wiped his eyes, and steadied the weapon on a bamboo root. He waited. Waited for the exact moment the Huey drifted close enough. And bracka bracka bracka. The RPD opened fire, muzzle flashes bursting out of the hidden hole like bright teeth. The Huey jolted violently as rounds slammed into its tail boom. In the cockpit, Hawk swore. "We're hit." Tail section taking fire. The helicopter lurched sideways. The gunner lost his stance, gripping the mounted M60 to steady himself. Taking fire from the left. From the left. Halpern cursed. "Damn it!" Jennings, Kerr, shift left. "Suppress that gun." Bullets snapped across the Paddies as the RPD peppered the Huey again. Inside the ditch, Sang looked up through the showering mud. He recognized that rhythm. That sound. That courage. They're still fighting. He pulled too close. Now is our chance. We move when the helicopter tilts. Two blinked. "Move where, Sergeant?" Sang stared across the Paddies, calculating, listening to the Huey's failing balance. "That depends on whether it crashes," he said quietly. Above them, the Huey bucked again, this time harder. Kerr shouted, "Sarge, it's going down." Halpern drew a sharp breath. Everyone watched. As the helicopter, battered, smoking, fighting gravity, tried desperately to claw back into the sky. But the Paddies below waited like an open hand. The Huey pitched sideways, tail shuddering violently as smoke poured from the boom. Chief Warrant Officer Morrison pulled hard on the cyclic, muscles straining, jaw locked. The helicopter didn't listen. It groaned, bucked, and skidded through the air like a wounded animal. "We're losing tail authority," the co-pilot shouted, gripping the overhead handles. "We gotta put her down, Hawk." Morrison scanned the Paddies. Water, mud, dikes, nothing solid. But he didn't have a choice. "Brace!" he barked. Below, the Americans along the dike watched in helpless horror. Jennings yelled, "Clear the LZ! Get back! Get back!" Halpern stood his ground, waving his arms. "Put it down on the Paddy! We got you! Bring it down!" The Huey descended fast, rotors chopping the air unevenly, sending up spirals of mist. The tail dipped dangerously low, nearly clipping the water. Inside the ditch, Tu and Sang clung to the muddy bank as the aircraft roared overhead. The sound was overwhelming, pure thunder. The downdraft threw water into their faces like handfuls of needles. Sang shielded his head. "Hold on." Whump, whump, whump. The skids hit the Paddy. Once. Twice. The third impact forced the Huey sideways, skidding across the waterlogged field. Mud sprayed in a massive arc. The rotor blades dipped, too low, catching the surface of the Paddy. Crack, wham. One of the blades shattered, flinging metal shards in all directions. The helicopter spun, the cockpit kicking up a wave of mud as Morrison fought for control. "Brace! Brace!" the co-pilot yelled. And boom. The Huey rolled onto its side, one skid snapping clean off. The entire aircraft slammed into the Paddy with a violent splash, sending a geyser of water 30 feet into the air. The rotor came apart, pieces flying like shrapnel across the field. Silence followed, brief, stunned, suffocating. Then smoke began to rise from the broken fuselage. Halpern didn't hesitate. "Move to the bird. Go, go, go." Bravo Company sprinted across the Paddies, boots slapping the churned-up water. Kerr nearly tripped in a rut but kept running. Jennings covered the tree lean, firing short bursts to keep the NVA pinned. Inside the ditch, Sang saw the crash clearly. The Huey lay half-submerged, tilted on its right side, tail boom twisted like broken bone. Tu whispered, almost involuntarily, "Ho Van Song Kong? Are they still alive?" Sang wiped the mud from his eyes. Americans don't leave their dead. They'll come for them. He wasn't wrong. Halpern reached the wreck first, splashing up to the shattered door frame. Smoke poured out in thick waves. He dropped to his knees. Crew. Sound off. A cough. Weak. From inside. Halpern yelled back. They're alive. Kerr, Jennings. On me. Jennings slung his rifle and helped pry the bent door frame. Kerr reached in, dragging the co-pilot out first. His helmet cracked, face bloodied but breathing. The gunner crawled out next, coughing and covered in mud. But Morrison, the pilot, was still trapped. Halpern hurled his shoulder into the frame. Come on, move. Jennings strained beside him. We're not leaving without him. The metal groaned, shifted, gave an inch. But at that exact moment, Sang saw movement in the treeline. His own men, some wounded, some furious, were regrouping. And they were looking at the downed helicopter the same way Sang was. A target. An opportunity. A chance to turn the tide. He grabbed 2's arm. This is it. We push now. 2 blinked. But the Americans are busy, Sang said. And vulnerable. The decision was made. While Bravo Company fought to save their pilots, the surviving NVA prepared to strike. Between the two forces, the Paddies were about to become a killing ground. And the downed Huey, still smoking, still hissing, sat like bait in the middle of it all. If this moment had your heart pounding, hit like, subscribe for more Vietnam War sagas, and comment where you're watching from. The smoke from the downed Huey drifted low over the Paddies, mixing with the mist, turning the air into a gray, choking haze. Halpern wiped his eyes, coughing hard. The heat from the engine compartment radiated through the fractured hull, warming the shallow water around his knees. Pilot's pinned, he shouted. Jennings, get his harness off. Kerr, cover the treeline. Kerr lifted his M16, scanning the wavering shadows across the field. His hands trembled, not from fear but adrenaline burning through his veins. Inside the shattered cockpit, Chief Warrant Officer Morrison was barely conscious. His left leg was trapped under the twisted metal of the instrument panel, and each breath came shallow and ragged. Jennings reached in, fingers slipping on the wet metal. Sir, stay with me. I'm getting you out. Morrison's voice was barely audible. Don't let this bird burn. It's not burning today, Jennings growled, bracing his foot against the frame. Behind them, Halpern risked a glance toward the ditch. He froze. Movement. Multiple figures. Low. Advancing. His worst fear ignited in an instant. NVA. Right flank. Coming straight for the wreck. He roared. Everyone on line. Protect the crew. Across the paddy, Sergeant Sang led his remaining fighters out of the ditch, their uniforms soaked, rifles caked with mud. Their faces were hardened, some bloodied, some bruised, but all determined. They knew the Americans would save those pilots at any cost. That was the weakness Sang intended to exploit. Tan Tsong en Han. Dung de ho tap hop. Move quickly. Don't let them regroup. Private Lê Văn Tự fired the first shot. Crack. The bullet snapped past Kerr's cheek, sending him diving behind the Huey's tail boom. We're taking fire. Kerr shouted. They're coming in from the ditch. Hold them back. Halpern yelled. Jennings, hurry. The firefight exploded. M16s barked in tight, controlled bursts. AK-47 fire answered with rapid, angry volleys. Tracer rounds streaked across the paddies, glowing briefly before disappearing into the haze. Water erupted in splashes as bullets ripped through the surface. Sang kept low, advancing in zigzag steps across the shallow paddy. 2 followed close behind, firing and dropping, like he'd been trained. For every few steps they gained, Americans would hammer them with suppressive fire, forcing them down again. But they kept coming. Closer. Closer still. Halpern saw it. They're trying to overrun the crash site. Spread out. Don't let them close the distance. Bravo squad shifted left and right, forming a protective half-circle around the wrecked Huey. Bullets smacked into the downed helicopter, sending metallic pings ringing like alarm bells. Jennings shouted from inside the cockpit, "I've got the harness off, but I can't free his leg. Pull him anyway." Halpern barked. Jennings clenched his teeth, grabbed Morrison under the arms, and yanked. The pilot screamed, raw, desperate, primal. But he came loose. Jennings dragged Morrison through the broken doorframe, their legs splashing through the water as Halpern and Kerr covered them with tight bursts of fire. Two saw the movement. Ho kio fai tsong ra. They're pulling the pilot out. Sang raised his rifle to fire, and a burst from Jennings's M16 forced him back into the mud. The air was frenzy and chaos. Shouts, gunfire, splashing, the dull groan of bending metal. Sang's fighters were pushing hard, but the Americans were fighting like cornered wolves, protecting their wounded with savage, unyielding precision. Two reloaded behind a submerged dike, hands shaking. He peeked over the edge and locked eyes with Halpern for a single, haunting second. Two soldiers. Two worlds. Both exhausted. Both refusing to break. Halpern shouted, "Push them back. Don't let them close. Push them back." Bravo Company opened fire in a unified volley that shook the entire Paddy. Bullets tore through reeds. Mud leapt from the ground. The water boiled with impacts. Sang felt the pressure building. His men were slowing. Breaths ragged. Ammunition dwindling. This was it. Either break through now, or be swallowed by the American counterfire. He lifted his fist. Zong Len. Charge. His men rose as one, and Halpern braced his rifle, eyes locked forward. The final clash at the crash site was seconds away. Sang's shout cut through the haze like a blade. Zong Len. His remaining fighters surged forward, splashing through the Paddy with a ferocity born of desperation. Mud kicked upward with every step. Water churned beneath their feet. Their silhouettes moved like ghosts in the smoke drifting from the wrecked Huey. Private Lê Văn Tự fired as he ran, the recoil jolting up his arms. He didn't stop to aim. There was no time. The Americans were dragging their pilot away. In his mind, the urgency overwhelmed everything else. Stop them. Push through. Break their line. The Americans saw the wave coming. "Here they come," Kerr shouted, falling into a firing stance beside the Huey's shattered tail. "They're charging us." Halpern steadied himself against the dike, mud dripping from his boots. "Don't give 'em an inch. Hold the line." Crack, crack, crack. M16s opened fire in a disciplined, merciless wall of sound. Shell casings flew. The hot smell of gunpowder mixed with the cold stink of paddy water. The recoil thudded into shoulders and chests. The NVA staggered, but they did not stop. Two slipped and nearly fell face-first into the paddy. He caught himself, water splashing up across his face. He blinked, kept moving. Ahead of him, one of Sang's fighters took a bullet to the leg and collapsed into the mud, but still tried to crawl forward, dragging his rifle behind him. Sang pushed ahead, teeth gritted, rifle bucking in his hands. Rounds snapped past his ears, but he didn't break stride. He had seen Americans hesitate before. He had seen them fear charges like this. But Halpern wasn't breaking. He stepped fully into the open, bracing his rifle against the downed Huey. "Send it!" he yelled. Bravo Company unleashed every ounce of firepower they had left. A torrent. Fast, disciplined, relentless. Jennings, crouched beside the pilot's limp body, fired in tight bursts. Kerr dropped to one knee, launching another 40mm grenade. It exploded in the center of the charging line, throwing mud and bodies into the air. Two felt the shock wave hit him like a physical punch. He flew sideways, slammed into the water, and slid through the muck. His ears rang. His vision blurred. He lifted his head, gasping, blinking away mud. The world spun. Through the haze he saw Sang, still standing, still firing, the sole figure pushing the charge forward. "Sarge!" a voice shouted from behind two. "Sarge, fall back!" But Sang didn't hear it. Or perhaps he refused to. He charged the last 20 yards alone, firing and shouting over the gunfire. "Teep tuc! Push forward!" Halpern saw him coming. A lone figure. Determined. Relentless. Fearless. He admired the courage. Hated what he had to do about it. He steadied his aim. Sang fired one last burst. Halpern fired one last shot. Crack. The sergeant's steps faltered. His rifle slipped from his hands. He hit the paddy water with a heavy splash and fell still, ripples spreading slowly across the muddy surface. Silence rippled through the battlefield. The remaining NVA froze. Their momentum shattered. Confusion spread. Exhaustion overcame adrenaline. Their sergeant was down. Their push had failed. One by one, they slid back into the ditch, pulling wounded comrades with them, disappearing into the reeds with quiet, retreating splashes. Halpern stood up slowly, chest heaving, rifle still raised in case the retreat was a feint. But it wasn't. The charge was broken. The crash site was still theirs. Jennings leaned over Morrison. "Pilot's stable. We need medic support now." Kerr collapsed to a sitting position in the muddy water, breathing so hard his whole torso shook. "They almost took us. They almost took all of us." Halpern, still watching the fading movement in the ditch, murmured, "No, not today." The paddy was quiet again, except for the distant beat of another Huey approaching. Reinforcements. Finally. The sun pierced the fog, shining down on the ruined helicopter, the rippling water, and the men who'd fought to hold it. Two, hiding back in the ditch, stared at the fallen Sang. His mentor. His anchor. His courage. The boy whispered into the mud, "Ex an loi trung doi truong." "I'm sorry, Sergeant." For the Americans, the fight had been survival. For the NVA, it had been duty. For both, the rice paddies had become something no soldier could forget. The beating of rotors echoed faintly over the valley, growing louder by the second. Another Huey, this one spotless, undamaged, and glinting in the morning sun, cut across the tree line and angled toward the wreck site. Its green fuselage painted long shadows across the shimmering paddies. Halpern exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Rescue bird inbound. Hold your positions." Jennings pressed 2 fingers to Morrison's neck. "Pulse is improving. We got him, Sarge. He's gonna make it." The pilot, half-conscious, opened one eye. Mud caked his face, and his helmet dangled by its chin strap. Did we crash?" Jennings let out a small laugh, relief wrapped in exhaustion. "Yeah, sir. But you stuck the landing." Morrison coughed. "Didn't feel like it." Kerr trudged over, slapping Jennings on the back. "Hell of a job pulling him out." Jennings nodded, but his eyes were already drifting back to where the NVA had disappeared. "They'll be back," he muttered. "They always come back." Halpern overheard and shook his head. "Not today. They're regrouping, but they're hurt. And they know reinforcements are on the way." But even as he spoke with authority, he couldn't shake the image burned into his memory. Sang charging alone through the paddy. Mud flying. Gun blazing. Courage radiating off him like heat. That wasn't just bravery. That was conviction. And Halpern respected it, even if it had nearly killed him. The rescue Huey flared above them and touched down with a clean, graceful landing that contrasted sharply with a destroyed wreck lying half-submerged nearby. Dust and water swirled around the platoon as the crew chief shouted, "Medics! Move your asses!" 2 medics sprinted from the helicopter, splashing across the mud, carrying stretcher poles. They reached Morrison in seconds. "Got him," one medic said, sliding the stretcher under his back. "Easy now. 1, 2, lift." The American lines shifted to provide cover, rifles trained on the ditch. Every man expected a final desperate assault. But none came. Across the paddy, deep in the reeds, Private Lê Văn Tự sat in the water with his knees pulled against his chest. The body of Sergeant Sang lay half-submerged a few yards away, reeds brushing against his still shoulders. Tự had never seen Sang fall. He'd thought the sergeant unstoppable, like the mountains themselves. And now, in the aftermath of chaos, the young soldier's breath shook as he stared at the lifeless form. From deeper in the ditch, an NVA lieutenant, face streaked with mud and fury, grabbed Tự by the shoulder. "Get up. We're retreating north. Now." Tự didn't move at first. But Sergeant Sang. The lieutenant's voice was hard. "We honor him later. Move." Reluctantly, painfully, Tự rose and followed the retreating column into the reeds. Their silhouettes faded into the mist, swallowed by the jungle, leaving only ripples behind. Back at the crash site, Halpern watched them vanish. He lowered his rifle. "They're pulling back for good," he said quietly. "Fight's over." Kerr let out a long breath. "About damn time." The medic team loaded Morrison into the rescue Huey. The pilot, barely conscious, raised a hand toward Halpern. "Good work, Sergeant. Wouldn't be here without you." Halpern nodded once. "We don't leave our own behind." As the helicopter lifted off, mud spraying below it, Bravo Company formed up around the wreck and their wounded. The Paddies, once a quiet oasis of green and shallow water, now bore the scars of the battle. Broken plants, bullet holes, churned mud, a destroyed Huey half-sunk like a dying beast. Jennings stepped next to Halpern. "Sarge, you think they were surprised we landed out here?" Halpern looked over the field, the mud, the water, the impossible landing zones. "Surprised," he said. "Yeah. I think landing on their rice paddies scared the hell out of them." He paused, then added, "And fighting from those same paddies, that's what they'll remember." The sun climbed higher. The mist thinned. And the quiet of the valley returned at last, soft, reflective, heavy with what had just taken place. 2 sides. 2 stories. 1 brutal morning. The valley was finally still. The helicopters had withdrawn, leaving only the lingering echo of their rotors drifting across the distant hills. Bravo Company stood amid the flooded fields, catching their breath, weapons lowered but not slung. No one spoke for several minutes. The silence was thick, like the Paddies themselves were absorbing the noise of the battle, swallowing every shout, every shot, every final cry. Halpern waded toward the wrecked Huey, now resting at an awkward angle, half submerged. The metallic shell that had once been a lifeline was now a battlefield monument. He pressed a hand to its fractured frame. "Damn fine flying," he whispered, almost to himself. Jennings walked up beside him. His uniform was soaked, his face streaked with smoke and mud. "Never seen a bird take that much punishment and still get us down in one piece." Halpern nodded. "Hawk saved his crew. That's all a pilot can ask for." Kerr approached, M79 slung over his shoulder, every step heavy. "Sarge, did we really hold this place?" Halpern looked across the paddies, the bullet-pocked water, the floating bits of torn vegetation, the muddy footprints where the NVA had charged. It looked less like farmland and more like a scar. "We held," Halpern said. "And we held because we were supposed to." But inside, he knew the truth. It wasn't just tactics. It wasn't just firepower. It was willpower, on both sides. He looked toward the tree line. Somewhere beyond the mist, A young North Vietnamese soldier was carrying the memory of this fight, carrying the death of a sergeant who had charged alone, carrying questions, anger, determination. War did that. It scattered stories across the land, leaving each man to make sense of what happened in his own way. On the far side of the valley, hidden in the thickening jungle, Private Lê Văn Tự followed the retreating NVA column, his step slow, his heart heavier than his pack. The lieutenant in front barked orders. The wounded groaned. The mud sucked at their feet. But Tự heard none of it. His mind replayed the moment Sang fell, then the moment the Americans stopped firing once the NVA broke off. Not because they were weak, but because the fighting was done. He had expected the Americans to chase them, hunt them, finish them. They didn't. And something about that settled deep in his chest. A mixture of confusion, respect, and a simmering vow that one day, somehow, he would return. Maybe not to this field, but to the fight. Back at the crash site, Halpern gathered his men. Pack it up. We're moving to high ground. Recovery team will secure what's left of the bird. Kerr rubbed the back of his neck. Feels wrong to leave her behind. She did her job, Halpern said. Now we do ours. Bravo Company trudged through the paddy in a slow, exhausted march. Sunlight glimmered on the surface, turning the water gold. From a distance, the valley looked peaceful again, as if none of the last hours had happened. But the Paddies remembered. They remembered the roar of the Hueys, the shock of their landings, the frantic scramble for life, the charge of men willing to die for their side. The moment steel met mud and the sky came crashing down. And long after Halpern's boots left the flooded field, long after Tự vanished into the jungle, the ripples lingered, carrying the echoes of the fight across the quiet valley. Some battles were victories. Some were losses. But some, like the one fought in these rice paddies, became stories whispered for years. Stories of shock. Stories of courage. Stories of helicopters landing where no one believed they could. Stories that shaped the war. Stories that outlived the men who fought them. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps these Vietnam War stories alive.